I am the COO of a company here in Portland. We're closing out our Series A raise right now, and it's very much around the metrics of what's going on with our company and sales and our customers. And that brings us to this idea of lifetime value or long term value, depending on how you use it, and also customer acquisition cost. And as some of us had some conversations on the internet and then here also in Clubhouse, it just, we needed to have a broader conversation about this. And so I went to the homies, folks that I know a lot more about this than myself, and said, hey, let's take 60 minutes and have a conversation about this. And hopefully, if this goes well, it's the first conversation about this. But also it plants the seed for folks to kind of get a grounding in understanding more about unit economics of how they look at their business, and hopefully get some gems for how they can be able to move forward. Um, so as I continue to manage things, I would love for the people joining me on the stage to introduce themselves before we start with the conversation. And I've got a few questions set up. And then also, thank you for coming to the Black Founders Club. Chandra and I are moderators from the Black Founders Club, and we appreciate you coming and joining us. All people are welcome in here today, but we're the hosts. And so, Chandra, if you would, please kick us off with introducing yourself, please.
Hey guys, so I am Chandra Washington. I am the president and co-founder of TBC Capital. We offer on-demand CFO, strategic, and advisory services to startups and small businesses, and do a lot of work around metrics, KPIs, quantifying your business. And so CAC and LTV is always a really interesting conversation because with some of the earlier stage companies that I work with, you know, being able to calculate that number and really drive towards a good LTV to CAC ratio is um, interesting, fun. And so happy to be here to discuss this with everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Chandra. Nick, why don't you go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Nick Bardwaj. I'm the managing partner at Tribe Group, where we invest, advise, and create startups. I come from a wonderful world of like mobile gaming, so I've had a real large focus on understanding paid growth channels from the early days of iOS and Android. So I love talking about CAC and LTV, as those are really, really robust terminologies in the world of free-to-play gaming, where you're able to get users to spend over $1 million in a title. So got a lot of lessons from that, and really excited to share, because I think from that, it's how you apply that knowledge into all these different verticals, similar to D2C, CPG, SaaS. There's so many other interesting ways. So excited to share the stage with so many great people, including Chris. Chris, I'll pass it off to you, man.
Hey, thanks, Nick. Thanks, Steven and Chandra. I am a failed musician turned bootstrapper. My wife, Jamie Schmidt, and I had a company called Schmidt's Naturals that started in our kitchen, and we grew that slowly without investment to an acquisition by Unilever in 2017. So we've been working really closely with all kinds of consumer product brands, helping them figure out what it looks like to sell online and then translate that into retail environments. So I'm here to talk a little bit about how to kind of blend both worlds and speak to both points of view. But I'm really excited. And by the way, I'm an investor in Steven's brand. I'm a very proud investor in a kid's book about.
Thank you, Chris. Chandra, I'm going to give you the first question to kind of lay the groundwork for us with your financial mind, in both being helping people on the operation side, but also understanding how investors think. Can you lay out for us why LTV and CAC are related and why they're so important for growing companies? And you spilled the beans a little bit initially when you were speaking, but can you talk to us and give us your idea of what a good LTV to CAC ratio is?
Sure. So obviously, or maybe not obviously, but CAC is your customer acquisition cost. So what does it cost you to bring a customer into your business? And there are different levels of this, right? Like, what does it cost you to get them to the website? What does it cost you to get them to fully convert? But then the LTV portion is over the lifetime lifetime of them being a customer with you, what is that dollar amount that they're spending? And so that number is going to really fluctuate depending on the type of business that you're in and your business model. But then when you're looking at an LTV to CAC ratio, you're looking at something around 3x. And this conversation actually came or started because I put a number in. I asked the group chat, I said, what is the craziest CAC or LTV to CAC ratio that you've seen? Because I was looking at a company that had a 10x ratio at the moment.
Wow.
And so,
oh boy.
yeah, I mean, it was
Dang.
wild. And so just trying to understand, what is the potential spend that you would have to that you as a company would have to spend in order for even have that be possible, right? Or like how do you even make that happen? But overall, we're looking at hopefully a 3x ratio, and CAC and LTV being related in the cost to bring them in as a customer, and then the total that they're spending with you over the lifetime of them being a customer.
Great points, Chandra. And I think it's important for people to understand that higher isn't necessarily better when it comes to that ratio. When you get to something north of 5x, you're probably not spending enough money on marketing, and you're leaving opportunities out on the table for competition to eat up. Nick, this is something that is different for different industries, and you brought up the gaming industry and how that may be different than the D2C or e-commerce space that Chris and I navigate. Can you tell me a little bit from your perspective about how companies in the vertical you're really close to think about LTV and CAC in the relationship there?
Yeah, sure. So, I think the two biggest things for context here is that majority of the most successful games in this world utilize a business model of freemium. So, what I'll kind of speak to is like, how does CAC and LTV look for any freemium product? So, definitely in gaming, but also outside of gaming, software as a service would fall into this. Think about doing a trial on Dropbox and then upgrading to the Pro. That is technically a freemium product as well. And in mobile gaming, what that essentially is right, you're essentially allowing the user to download the game for free. And then more importantly, trying to upsell them along the way to buy some type of in-app purchase or microtransaction. So with that kind of in mind as the context, what's really important is it's understanding that you're measuring the right thing, right? So it's not just, what is CAC, and more importantly, what is it different than CPA, right? And most people should understand that when it comes to CAC, which is customer acquisition costs, and CPA, which is cost per acquisition, these are two very different things that a lot of early stage startups conflate, right? And the reason for that is like cost of acquisition cost in a freemium model is the actual cost it takes to get a paying customer, meaning that a user who has spent within your platform. That's really how you have to measure it. While CPA would probably measure the amount of leads or individuals who download the games. So the reason for that is that, especially in freemium economies, the vast majority of your users do not spend, right? It's kind of this power law of economics sometimes, especially in gaming. So you really need to make sure you're measuring the two, and more importantly, presenting those right metrics correctly for investors. Because if you conflate CAC to CPA, right, it shows that you don't have an actual understanding of ROI. The second thing you also need to get right then is you have to start thinking through like payback windows, right? So again, across that CAC to the measurement of your LTV, how long does it take you to return that investment? Because you might have like a 3-to-1 ratio or a 4-to-1 ratio, but if that ratio for some reason takes 2 years to return, that's a really tough business to potentially scale considering that payback window. So that's kind of the triangulation we're trying to look at, right? Is what is your actual cost to acquire a paying customer? What is the LTV potential of that customer? And where does their payback window exist? So you have at least a break-even window and how long it gets there. And usually your break-even window should be, of course, as short as possible. In gaming, it's usually like ideal 30 days, and then you could maybe extend it to 90 days is kind of what people are seeking. So those are kind of the metrics as well. In regard to ratios, it's hard in our world because of the power law dynamics. In wonderful world of free to play, what's interesting is that the top 1% of users can make up over 60% of your revenue, right? And that's kind of the brilliance of freemium. So with that in mind, right, you really don't utilize a ratio across all your user bases. What ends up happening is you use a ratio on a per channel basis. And that's what's really important as well, is that you need to be measuring the CAC, LTV, and payback window of every single channel and optimize along the way. So like the top mobile gaming companies will be using 100 different channels, 100 different ad networks, right? Consistently through, and they're constantly optimizing for that. And that's the real key, right? Is knowing like what channels are working well for you within it. And then if you have multiple channels, it comes down to portfolio theory of how you want to manage your blended break even, your blended CAC, and your blended LTV. So it's a little bit different in that manner, but it still remains true for kind of all freemium models. So that's kind of the perspective we hold when we jump into this market.
That's awesome. Thank you, Nick. And I'm just going to reset the room before George talks to us. Welcome to the Black Founders Club. Today we're having a customer myth busting conversation about what is CAC and LTV and how those things are associated to one another. Next up, George, brought you to the stage, man. You've raised a lot of money for your technology startup, and I would love to hear from your perspective how those conversations change and how LTV and CAC became part of your vernacular as you started raising and going into the different rounds for your company, and give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yes, we are actually, I guess we were bootstrapped and got to the point where we raised, $42 million led by Goldman Sachs. But I actually more have a question, right? Because this is one of the challenges that we face as a company as to how to accurately truly measure this, right? So this is more of a question for Chandra. Now I'm an accountant as well, right? So I know this world pretty well. However, the way we measure at our company, the way we measure LTV is we take our churn rate, right, over the year. We take our churn rate and divide that by essentially the retention rate, right? So we say what is our churn rate? How many of them churned? And that's whatever that percentage is. We ours, it happens to be 96% retention rate. We take that amount, that churn rate divided by 12, right, and then multiply by our average ARR, and that gives us our customer lifetime value, right? Which for us now is over $200,000. So the question I have is, because that churn rate is also determined by customer success, right? The more successful you are at retaining, at keeping your customers happy, the more you reduce churn. We actually include our CS salaries as part of our as part of our cost of customer acquisition, so to speak, right? Because it reduces our churn, right? Is that something that you see in the market, or are we thinking about it differently?
So when you say your customer success, is that based on, are those flat rates or are they based on
salaries? So customer success would include our implementations team and our CS team. So how it works, we include sales, we include everyone in sales, the SDRs and the AEs, and also our SMEs, our subject matter experts, or sales engineers, as some people may call them. And then we also include our implementations team and our customer success. And so I've seen people say yes or no to that, right? Adding CS and implementations as part of your cost of customer acquisition, but I don't think of it in terms of cost of customer acquisition. I like to think of it in terms of cost of customer retention, right, and acquisition, right? Blending those two, because whatever your cost of customer acquisition is, if your churn is high, it's going to kill you, right? So that's how I think about it, and because of that, I find it difficult to find a true north, right? So how do you guys think about that?
So I have not seen the implementation team and the SMEs included, but definitely sales, of course, but not the other two pieces.
Yeah,
I think
maybe
you're
go for it.
effectively marketing to your own customers via customer support, right? So I think that's increasingly kind of becoming the norm. I haven't seen it, in a P&L like balanced like that, but I think that we're talking about the merging of marketing and customer support, and I think that's like kind of a hallmark of like some of the greatest consumer brands. That's something that we did a lot of Schmitz is like we literally had those teams in the same office and they held the same meetings and they were there kind of understanding, so they kind of speak the same language. Like that's really important, right? So I think if they have shared these common skill sets, and obviously, you know, it costs a lot more to, you know, get new customers than it does to treat your existing ones, right? So I think it's okay. I don't think it's like a hard and fast rule. I think you might confuse people by doing that, but I think it's increasingly becoming the norm.
Yeah, I would kind of echo that. Is like, it might not be a metric you might want to present externally for a future fundraising round with all of that details in, but I see that as a really strong internal metric, right? So there's like kind of two things you hit at that were really interesting to me. One is, right, like what you'd want to see is you'd want to have some analysis of knowing like what is the ROI on a per sales unit team, which you might include sales and customer success, and kind of measuring their profitability on a month by month or whatever time window you might see. And that's interesting for you because you view that like that is the entire LTV management of your core user base. And you could kind of break that over, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever your average LTV or average lifetime is of your user. But the other thing that you're actually speaking to is actually a new business unit that is very popular in gaming and popular in freemium. It's LTV optimization or LTV maximization. Your customer support is actually focused on reducing churn, which increases LTV. So that is the one lever that they're specifically focusing on. And what you almost want to start measuring is that based off X amount of hours of customer support, how does it increase the LTV of our overall customer base, right? And that's kind of what you almost want to A/B test across, is like if it's 5 hours versus 10 hours versus 30 hours, or however you want to manage it. Again, I know very little about the core business you're building, but that's actually really interesting then, because you have two teams. You have kind of the core break even team of what you're trying to understand on the LTV analysis and the CAC analysis of your existing users. But then you have an LTV growth team almost, right? Where you're trying to maximize the total value of every user that comes on your platform. And right now you view customer service as a reduction of churn. And I'm sure there's other levers you want to put into it. And this essentially becomes like a live operations team. So again, a slightly different lens of looking at it. But I would say that you should be trying to build all of those internal metrics for yourself. If it could help you justify spend and allocation of capital, then it's always a good metric. But the question that begs is what needs to be shared? It's deterministic based off the audience. But again, the more you drill down on this, the stronger it's going to give confidence to anyone, including guys like, you have Goldman Sachs. I know them really well. They have a great gaming team, so they would understand this quite a bit.
George, that was my question as well. Is are you sharing that? Like, is that something that you're offering, or is it when you get down to like diligence and talking more through the process and the business, that's when you share it?
Now we've literally, we raised our round and we never really talked about LTV or CAC. Frankly, because how do you truly measure LTV, right? As as a SaaS company that sells B2B, right? We have very little churn. What is it? 3 years? Is it 5 years? That's why we use the churn number, right? That's why we say, okay, what's our churn? Annualize that, right? Divided by 12. And for us right now, it's 218 months multiplied by our average ARR. And that gives us what our true LTV is. I'm trying to find out other ways to justify it. Could you say 3 years? Could you say 7 years? Could you say 12 years? But because at least the number that we do know is what our churn is, right, at 4%. And we say, okay, if we annualize that retention rate, 12 divided by that 4%, that gives us our number of months, and then extrapolate it into years and multiply by ARR. So that's why it's kind of confusing. LTV is one of those things that it's very difficult to measure. Especially we're not an early stage company. This year will be 10 years, but it's just one of those things that I feel like anyway. It's just grasping at straws. At least the churn is the way I feel I can accurately measure it.
I've never really seen an LTV come true. Like it's often overshot by quite a bit, right? So I think it's smarter to focus on just the churn metric, especially for earlier stage brands, right? Like they're changing so much. Something like iOS 14 can come and totally nuke their like expected cost, or nuke their LTV, and they might come out with a new product model that totally changes the game, and that customer might be worth twice as much, potentially. And there's just so many dynamics that change into it. So if you're like focusing early days on like that, I think it's smart to have an internal metric, but like as far as like investors and board and kind of like simplifying the process, like focusing on just like retention is the way to go.
And to add to Nick, one thing you said that was absolutely accurate it was how quickly do you actually recover that cost of customer acquisition, right? That was a big thing for us, and as a result, we started to go through the whole cash crunch, right? Where we close a deal, a big deal. However, it takes us about 90 days to get our cash from the customer, right? And we still have to pay programmers, we still have to pay commissions, we still have to pay customer success implementations, all these people. At that point, that's when companies go raise money. But what we decided to do was we changed our billing profile and we charged our customers 3 years upfront, right? So we get the cash from them 3 years upfront, and that's what we used to kind of support our growth. Even though right now we're at about $20 million, we're north of $20 million ARR, we still have $20 million in the bank, right? Because we get that money up front, which is slightly unusual. But that's a very important point, Nick, that you made is the velocity of the funds coming in.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like, it means like you have a lot of leverage, which is great. Like, if you're able to move to 3 year upfront, that's fantastic. And I think, if you're not in that situation, the other thing I'd really be recommending for others is knowing what are the alternative forms of capital that are able to bridge you in those kind of scenarios, right? So there's like accounts receivable financing or AR financing. You're seeing new versions of like, clear bank or lighter capital that are willing to forward cash on certain structures in the D2C and CPG space. So that's really why it becomes so important in that management. And especially when you're on the B2B enterprise side, you have those large windows where you're utilizing venture capital sometimes to essentially address that. But that's like the most costliest capital you can give up because it's ownership in your business. So this also becomes a larger factor of how you raise capital. And this is the, one thing I try to, really, really emphasize to any founders, that don't over raise just for marketing spend or justifying these spends. Find the other sources of capital that can justify. And in most cases now, especially in this market, it is super frothy for early stage, founders. Like, there's a lot of cool ways to capitalize your business. Even like crazily, I don't recommend this ever before, but like, it's just such crazy terms. Like, even the SBA loans at 3.75% interest on 30 years are ridiculous loans. So like, always think about that, because then capital composition becomes so important to CAC and LTV, because you also want to think through ownership stake, enterprise value, and these are the other elements that become a little bit more deeper in the game, but don't want to get us too off track here.
Yeah, no, Nick, I think you're spot on. I think at the end of the day, what we're ultimately talking about is understanding how cash moves in and out of your business, and that's most fundamentally what this is about. And understanding your customer acquisition costs and the lifetime value of them helps you understand like where I'm going to have cash crunches and how I'm going to problem solve for that going forward in the future. If anyone has any other questions, would love to be able to open up the stage for folks to come up. And while I'm waiting for hands to raise there, I'd love to hear, hey, Chris, tell us a little bit about, from your standpoint, from the D2C space, how are you seeing things play out around CAC and LTV? And also, what are 2 or 3 things that, you wish people knew earlier on that they seem to trip up on when it comes to calculating these things and understanding what it means for their business?
Yeah, I just think that marketplaces in general are getting so big. The Targets, the Walmarts are getting so sophisticated. People can go jump on Instacart and get like 18 different stores at a time. So like the huge trend that we're seeing in D2C is actually a lot of these brands that were only selling online are now starting to think, hey, maybe I want to sell in retail. Maybe I want to sell wholesale to like that local grocery store, and they're trying to figure out where to start, right? But then the second that they do that, their LTV is like a total question mark. They're like, how do I actually understand? Because I used to pay $15 to get a customer online, but now that customer might go to Target and buy. And so they get really kind of hung up there. But by kind of merging the online and offline channels, getting insights into where your customers are buying, how many times they've like seen an ad, like it's so key. One thing that we did a lot at Schmidt's was start surveying people in aisle that had been buying products. And you can do this online, by the way, just like sending someone a post, survey. Would you be interested in buying in retail? Have you purchased our product in retail? Kind of merging the online and offline data sets as much as possible to be able to get insights into like how far your dollar is really going. And understand that it's kind of like a holistic thing. Once you start going into wholesale, for one, like your products being on shelf is kind of like an advertisement for customers to then go online. I can't tell you how often like a customer will see our deodorant on the shelf at like Target, but then end up buying it at Amazon or ended up going to our website where we have like a limited edition product that they can't find online. And it's the other way around too, right? Like you go online, you're like, why would I pay $4 to ship this stick of deodorant to my house when I can go over to my local Ralph's and buy it or get a coupon for it or something like that? So it's really important to kind of have, obviously data from both sets, but then to kind of make sure that your product is differentiated in different markets. I think it's really important to understand, like, if you don't have a really special reason for your customer to buy online from you, then they won't. So we worked really hard to do things like have really compelling bundles with awesome unboxing experiences, really great like white glove customer support experience. When somebody unboxes, they'll get a text and be able to jump on, with the customer support representative to talk about the best way to use the product. You could do things like a limited edition scents, or you can, maybe your product that's online, since it costs so much to ship, maybe you have to pay a little bit, you'd have to charge a little bit more for that. But to make up for that, maybe you give them like a bigger size or something like that. And then the size that you sell in Target is maybe a little smaller, but it's $5. It's more like the consumer version. So all those kind of different plays that we did in different channels with different products, and understanding how our customers were buying in those different channels, ended up being like making all the difference when we ended up selling the company. That was something about like, Unilever and Procter and L'Oreal, those companies, they were just wetting their teeth. Like, they love the product, they love the brand, but what they really wanted to understand was, how can a brand exist both online and offline? Because that's something that, they had never traditionally done with their hero brands. So that was one of the big strengths that I think we had at Schmidt.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Brian, welcome to the stage. Let us know what question you have for this amazing panel of folks that we have.
Hey, how you doing? I just wanted to come up and speak, I guess, with George. I was going to ask George, I feel like, I know you're saying LTV is hard to track down, but I feel like you might have it easier than, everyone, since you're getting your money up front. You wouldn't want to just use that 3-year upfront payment as LTV to simplify it?
No, because most of our clients, in fact, the churn, the little churn that we have are in those that signed 1-year deals, right? 72% of our clients pay us multiple years up front. And so if we use that 3 years, the churn on the 3-year deals are 0%, right? Obviously, you don't want 0% churn either, because that means your product is obviously not, you're not selling, it's too cheap, right? Ideally, you want about 3% churn. But on our 3-year deals, we just frankly have 0 churn there. And we're constrained by the marketplace as to how high we can raise our prices. But that's why I feel as if, the LTV numbers is arbitrary, kind of.
Right. So have you settled on the number?
Yeah, we have. And that's what I'm saying. So we take 4%, which is our churn total for the prior year. We take 4%, we divide that by, we annualize it, right? Divide that by 12. And then that gives us our number of months, right? And then we multiply that by our ARR. And then that gives us our LTV.
Nice. I guess I would say the one thing I would think about, because I like what you were saying, just in terms of measuring the other costs as well. I would say the one thing to think about is, as you grow, though, you're most likely going to be interacting with external parties. So it may be difficult, or you may have sensitivities about including operational costs in that number when you're dealing with agencies and all of that. So I would say, whatever the number is, settle on a number, or something that you're comfortable sharing externally. Because chances are, as you grow, there will be other entities that you start to partner with and agencies to bring on board to actually help scale even further.
Yeah, I'll frankly say this: I've never had a meaningful conversation with an investor, or this is probably not. Our situation is kind of different, but I've just never had a meaningful conversation where that, our cost of customer acquisition, our LTV, actually mattered. Right? It just frankly never has.
Yeah. I'm coming from the more so marketing perspective. So like ad agencies and marketing companies, and most like I said, as you scale, that'll probably come even more into play. So it'd be good to, provide a number that you're comfortable with sharing externally to those folks.
Sure.
Cool. Hey, Steven, do you mind? I'm actually curious to ping Chris a few more times on this because, in a slightly selfish way, I'm now running into the CPG D2C space and like a food launching, launching a few food brands. So, Chris, I'm curious, as like with your investor hat on, what are you looking for early stage founders who've just recently launched product around CAC, LTV, or growth or marketing? Curious, just what do you think is a composed way of pitching that, or what gets you excited at those early stages, whether it be like the pre-seed, seed, or pre-product launch stage?
I think I'm just kind of like looking for a lead cohort that can do a huge amount of the work. Like it's one thing to have this like big blended CAC, but like what I want to see is kind of that first 1,000 like true fans. I think that more than ever, like the CAC is so unstable. Like with the rising auction prices on like Facebook and Google, I think things like iOS 14 is really going to blow up people's LTV. So I'm not like super reliant on it. Like I don't look at those metrics as much as I look at like real true product market fit, as much as like I'll read like 100 product reviews or like 100 Instagram comments before I start like really diving into someone's Facebook ads manager account right now. And I think that's because I think it's important because like brands are starting and need to act a lot more like talent agencies at this point. Like they need to be like incubating their top customers to like do the work to tell their stories a lot more. Or they need to have like a founder at the top that's just like absolutely crushing it, that's going to go out every day and be it like spread the gospel of their brand, and really just like really think about it as like we're all in this together, right? Like having a more of like an affiliate mindset of like I can get other people into this brand to tell my story, so they can tell their story, so that this brand can be heard. I think that's key. You'll like when you see it, you like know it 100% of the time. Like you can go on somebody's Instagram page, some brand's Instagram page, and be like, okay, they're just paying for this placement, blah blah blah. Or you can see the post where it's like, damn, like this community is lit up, and that's what I get really excited about.
Got it. I love that. Like the emphasis on community and like that loyal user base or that loyal user cohort being more of a impact than anything else. Right. And I agree. I think that's the other thing that you hit on really well, Chris, is like, yeah, with all the changes in iOS 14, like very few people are really recognizing how much like, your CAC is going to be blown up in that manner. And just with those changes, it's going to kind of create another chasm for most users. So, Stephen, maybe kind of flipping the question back to you in your world, how do you see yourself looking at CAC to LTV with kind of your ventures? And as you raise potential venture capital, what do you think you need to be emphasizing as a founder or CEO within those roles, or what are you trying to get right over the next 3 to 6 months to have that confidence for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, over the last 60 days in doing our raise, it's been a lot of educating investors as they come into the conversation, because I think they've come into it with their understanding of what they think is good or what they think is bad or what they think where we should be. And how do we go and have that nuanced conversation of, well, here's how we calculate our CAC, here's how we calculate our long-term value. And also, like, we're a company that's 15 months old. So I wish from a longitudinal standpoint, we had a lot more data, but we don't. And so, I think Chris hit on it a little bit. What are those other touch points where people can kind of hitch their wagon to something earlier on when you're not 10 years into the business or 5 years, or even in our case, like 2 years. And so talking to them about that, and then kind of showing our work for how we want to move going forward and how we've navigated it. I mean, maybe that's a really good example. Chris, you're an investor in us. I mean, use us as an example. Like, what did you look for in our company, and what do you wish you would have seen more of? And maybe what are the things that going forward in the next 12 to 24 months you would love to see more in a company like ours that's a D2C company, moving into new verticals.
Okay, I'll tell you one thing that you did really well that just sold the hell out of me. And one thing so your founder and your partner Jelani Memory of Kids Book About, he started showing me the different cohorts, like from 1 year ago versus what it is today, right? And so he tracks the retention of the first cohort versus the second, third, fourth, like constantly. And so he can see the improvement over time. And so he said, look, our churn rate went from X to Y, and it was like really significant. And I said, what'd you do here? And he said, well, we fucked up. He was like, here's all the things we did wrong. And then we started figuring out, and then we fixed fixed it. I'm so impressed by any founder that will sit there, and I think this should be in everyone's pitch deck too, which is like everything you did wrong and then how you fixed it, because that will give me more conviction than anything else as an investor. Like, I don't want to see you tell me about all the great metrics you have. I want to see the bad ones, and then I want to see how you dug in and fixed the problem and made it better.
That's awesome. Chandra, I'd love if you could, for the folks in the audience that may not understand when Chris is talking about cohorts and how that relates to these calculations, can you give some more flavor to that and help them understand what he's referring to?
Yeah, so one of the ways that we're tracking cohorts with one of my companies is based on when they signed up, right? So you can look at a cohort of, let's say they signed up in January, and follow them. When do your customers start to fall off? So then you can kind of get an understanding of what that retention and churn is. One of the other cohorts we're looking at is the type of account that they signed up for, and what is the activity in this particular cohort that they're doing on the platform and on the app. And you get a lot of insights and data just by understanding some of those drop-off points, the amount of revenue that you're getting from these different cohorts, depending on how you're breaking it up. And instead of looking at your customers as a just a customer, as just someone that's spending, right? Breaking it up by different attributes will give you a lot more insights, and some of that data that Stephen was talking about, understanding the data and being able to talk to the data and then make changes based on where you're seeing some division is what's really going to help you figure out how to improve all kinds of things, but it depends on what you're measuring.
And yeah, sorry, go for it, George.
Well, I wanted to add something. From in my experience, right? What I've learned is that it also depends on what stage you're in as a company, right? I always say, in the early stages, process will kill you, but as you grow, if you don't have process, you'll die, right? So depending on the stage you're at, and especially in the very early stages, I mean, you just don't have enough data to be able to measure, your churn. You don't have enough data to be able to measure your LTV. You're just guessing at that point, right? So at that point, I think the greatest thing you should do is try to do that which doesn't scale, right? Do that which doesn't scale. And for us, that meant literally for our first 15 customers, I got on a plane and I flew. I mean, we're B2B, right? So it's slightly different. But I got on a plane and I flew to every single one. The moment I set the demo, I'd say, hey guys, I'd call them the next day and say, hey, guess what? I'll actually be in the Dallas area. Do you want to do this in person? And they'd say yes. And I'd fly over there. I'd use Southwest, because they hadn't, they could cancel at any time, no change fees, and fly over there. And it's very difficult for people to say no to your face, especially if they know you've made this effort to travel there. So obviously in that case, my cost of customer acquisition was sky high, right? But that taught us something very important, right? We learned how to pivot. Our very first client happened to be a franchisor, right? And because they were our first client that gave us money, we said, okay, that's our ideal customer profile. And so we started focusing on the franchisor market without realizing that it was absolutely, it literally wasted 6 months of our time, right? And we learned that because every other demo we we flew over there, sat down with them, and they signed up. And we now were able to analyze those 15 customers and say, okay, what did they have in common? And that told us who our ideal customer profile was, right? And we definitely would not have done that if we had just focused on the metrics, so to speak. But as we've evolved, right, then we start focusing a lot more on the metrics. So for us, I think it's important to realize at what stage you're on, and then try to glean information from that data that you have.
So that is absolutely very true, and that's exactly what's happening, right? So when we launched last year, following those customers and the conversations that we had with them allowed us to, the customers that are just now signing up, understanding how to walk them through using the platform so that we get them to come back. Before, people would sign up, they weren't coming back. We didn't know why. We started talking to them, we figured out why. So now we have in-app communications and other ways in which we are engaging the customer once they sign up. And then the other learnings that we're getting are how people are talking about the app. So because we followed that first cohort. We talked to them specifically, and thank you, George, for kind of leading me into this. We also followed their actions outside of the app. What were the mentions on social media? When they did mention on social media, how many people clicked the link to then come into the app? And so then now we're better suited for the folks that are signing on now to know exactly what we need to do to tell them what they need to do to bring in more people. And so we were able to, and that obviously reduces our customer acquisition, because now they are our evangelists, right? And so we did that by basically saying what were the things that we did wrong, or not even that we did wrong. What were the learnings, or what was the activity for the people that first signed up, to what activities do we need to get the people that are signing up now to do for us?
Yeah, just one thing I want to add to that. That's really great. Like, I just want to share kind of my rule of thumb of like how you build for cohorts. I'm a huge cohort guy. Like, I agree, it's not as valuable in the pre-seed, seed stage, but as you kind of get post-seed, there's a lot of interesting customer insights you can pull for it. So in my world, I look at like 5 ways I'm looking at cohorts. So I'm looking at cohorts over time, right? Just clustering based off entry point or download or first interaction of the user, and building it off time-based cohorts. The second thing I'm looking at for cohorts is channel cohorts, right? Like, where am I getting these users from, whether it be paid channels or organic channels? And I'm kind of segmenting to see what their actions and metrics look like within each individual channel. The third thing I'm really looking for as well is kind of like, I call them like point of entrenchment cohorts. What you'll see in like any core product is when you get users to do like action X multiple times, they tend to be entrenched in your product, right? So like in Facebook, they realized really early, once you had 5 friends, you probably never leave the product. So what they did is they measured metrics of the cohort before 5 friends and after 5 friends. And it's just giving you an understanding of like what that product market fit inflection point looks like within your business as well. You know, behind that, the other ways you want to look at cohorts and utilize cohorts is for A/B testing. When you are running different funnels, different features, trying to understand how to extract more value, especially if you're building a consumer first product, you know, you really want to be running a lot of different funnels and evaluating how the cohorts move through different A/B testing funnels to evaluate the results. So, you know, those are just ways that you can slice. And I think the key is making sure you're intentional about it. But really from that, it's utilizing all that data, then frame back kind of exactly what George is noting is like, how do you get insights from this, right? Whether it's targeting your ideal customer persona or buyer personas. So those are just a few different ways that I slice them in different buckets for.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nick. Andy, thank you for coming to the stage, man. Do you have a question for the group here?
Yeah, thanks for allowing me on the stage. The question I have is maybe again around the CAC calculations, and I love it that Nick went right before me, because some of the things that he was mentioning shows how much you can slice and dice a particular customer. And I am also very fascinated around this concept of cohort, and a single customer could belong to multiple different cohorts. That's just how you slice and dice it. The question I have is around the attribution of particular things. Nick was talking about the aspects of channel and how they came in, and the way I interpret that also could mean, you know, if you're bringing them in via an advertisement on Facebook versus an advertisement on Google, but those ones seem to be a little bit more cleaner, or the digital cookie trails that you can kind of follow to cohort them. But what about situations where things are a little bit harder, such as television ads or newspaper ads, or things like that, where you're really buying impressions? And I'm kind of curious everyone's thoughts on attribution for the CAC across these acquisition efforts that are not as easy to track back to an individual user.
Great question.
Yeah, I can give kind of my glance at this. I think what you'll essentially see is, right, yeah, the data's light from pretty much any analog or disconnected digital channel, which would be like television, newspaper, bus ads, etc. Really what you're trying to do is that in order to actually assess their value, you need to just be good at tracking everything else that is sourced, right? And then essentially from there, you're trying to then look at the arbitrage of running that campaign is what does that lift look like that was unexpected? And that then gives you a somewhat of a triangulation of that value. But this is like super advanced, and you have to have a pretty deep data pipeline. But that's usually how the best people do it. Is we'll track everything else, and we know exactly where all these users came from, and these users that we can't source, we'll give some type of ratio, a percentage to this campaign. But the real truth is, and most people like, I can give you the dirty truth of like what television ads are really used for today. They're not used for one-to-one ROI. They actually don't lead to one-to-one ROI value for almost any brand. Really what television is used for is to increase the click-through rate of all the other digital ads you're running. So the people who tend to run like, the Super Bowl ads are running it because they're trying to suppress the cost of click-throughs on all their ad impressions on all other digital channels. So like one of the first mobile gaming companies that ever ran a Super Bowl ad was Game of War. They put Kate Upton in a Super Bowl like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And the one-to-one ROI of that actual ad spend was negative if you're looking at how many new users came in through Super Bowl. But what it was amazing on positive ROI is that it increased the click-through rate by over 70% on all other channels for the next 3 weeks. And their concentrated ad spend, where at the time the Super Bowl slot cost them $2.5 million, put $1 million in budget, like a $3.5 million, that didn't mean anything to them because their average monthly UA spend was over 10, 20, $30 million. So you're actually utilizing it as a way to suppress the key metrics in your acquisition funnel on digital. Same thing with analog. Like really good analog campaigns are just there to help improve the digital campaigns in most cases, not all cases, but that's really what you're looking at. So right now the data is light from all of that. So it's just kind of the idea of, can you isolate it because you track all the known data really well? Or more importantly, are you tracking the sub-metrics on your funnel of conversion on CAC and LTV to understand what that impact of that ad did, right? In terms of click-through rates, install rates, conversion rates, whatever your core metrics may be for your activation funnel. So that's kind of how I look at all of those. And yeah, I wish there was better ways to quant that. Really what it is, it's purely speculation, and you're trying to see, can I find a channel with arbitrage? So it's just a lot of testing to see what works until it works. So, weirdly, way back in the day, like right now, I would tell you like pre-COVID again, or post-COVID, when we get back to maybe a normal reality, like bus ads and subway ads and taxi ads are actually really, really strong ROI if you have a large enough digital spend. But that's kind of the if and the necessity. So that's how I've seen it through my lens, but I'm sure there's a few other examples out there.
Yeah, and it depends where you're doing it, right? Because like doing it on the coast versus doing it in the middle of America could be totally different ROI, right? And then I think about it from like the reverse point of view too, where it's not necessarily like a commercial trying to drive to online, but it's more like a commercial or a circular ad or something trying to drive people into retail. So a lot of times we would do the digital ads to our commercials, but we would really isolate them geographically and then run an A/B test, just like you would run for a landing page and say, okay, in San Francisco, we're going to run this TV ad for a month, and it's going to air after The Bachelor every time at 8 p.m. or whatever. And then you look for the lift, and then if you don't see it, then you know that like maybe if it's in the wash, then like it didn't make the impact, right? Like, so there's this whole idea that like everything is holistic, but I don't really buy into it that much when it comes to like TV out of home. I think that, like to your point, Nick, like it's a lot of awareness driving the way that people use it today, but it's also, there is an element, especially in direct response advertising, where people can convert directly online. I think that's an interesting space that's kind of underutilized now too. Like you probably work with brands all the time. Like I'm sure like My Pillow probably makes like $300 million selling that stuff on Fox News every year. Casper does. I think there's a lot of, we saw like D2C brands on Super Bowl run Super Bowl commercials for the first time this year. I think we saw Manscaped, which I hate to even, I shudder to like utter Manscaped in any room, but yeah, I think that's kind of, that's an interesting thing too. So throwing a lot of stuff at the wall there, Andy, but I hope it helps.
Yeah, I think just want to echo on that one thing Chris says is that you're absolutely right. Small geo tests are really great for analog and being able to isolate. So like geo fencing that test, really good feedback there. And yeah, I hope we can say Manscape a few more times in these conversations. I love it.
Wait, so I actually have a question. Well, not a question, but just want to reiterate here. So I have a client that just did some advertising and some mobile advertising on buses and things in New York City. And we were kind of having this conversation, like, how do we measure the lift? And so one of the ways that you said, Chris, was looking at, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but looking at digital sales in that specific area and seeing if there's any lift there. Was that, am I getting what you're saying?
Yeah, totally. Either digital or retail. But the trick is, like, when you run that test, you don't want to touch anything else because if you like pull any other lever, then it kind of like screws everything up. And then
Right.
sometimes I would even double test that, right? Like sometimes it just might just be like even seasonal. So there's so many factors that play in, right? But when you like see the results on paper, like I mean, no, a lot of the stuff is guesswork, but it's at least educated guesses, right?
Yeah, and one of the issues, I love what you said, Chris, about running a second experiment too, because one of the biggest challenge that I'm just getting into this space, but you don't really have the counterfactual information of what if you didn't run those particular ads on the buses and on the TV, what would the lift have been without? And that's really hard to do on a non-digital or offline site. And we're trying to figure out as we go forward these kind of harder to measure things. If we do them, and we're still even challenging whether we even do these things, right? If it makes sense for our business, but if we do them, how do we apply them early on? Kind of like what Nick was saying, if we're not sophisticated yet in the more sophisticated and the more easier to measure, do we just take those and just apply it evenly across the entire cohort that comes in as an initial measure, or is that dangerous to that we might artificially inflate what we think the CAC is?
Yeah, so I definitely would never try to like overly extrapolate, but you could hold it as a form thesis, right? And it comes down to like how much slippage you want to build into that in order to test that thesis. But it really comes down to running a lot of iterations. I think Chris hits it really on the head when he notes like you can't be utilizing other levers when you're trying to isolate a very specific analog outcome of your test. Because if you do, it leads to like cross pollination and you're not sure which lever actually led to the results. So in this case, right, it's that same thing as that anything that isn't like directly quantifiable and you're essentially interpolating, take with a very strong grain of salt. Like never build your primary thesis around that, in my opinion, but definitely utilize it to inform educated theses that you want to test on, and do it in small cycles and make sure you're proving yourself right? Like, or more importantly, prove yourself wrong so you could get out of this in fast iteration cycles. Because that's really the other name of the game when it comes to CAC and LTV and optimizing for channels is, can you run efficient tests in 2 to 4 week cycles without losing enough money? Because we haven't even talked about the largest problem when it comes to digital. It's fraud. Like, I mean, if you look at what the numbers are, most people say like 40% of all digital ads are fraudulent right now. Like there is a huge amount of fraud that very few people understand. So you could be stuck on a channel where it might be showcasing the surface metrics really nicely, right? Like, oh, we're getting a bunch of users, we're getting a bunch of installs, right? But on the back end, right, if you're not connecting what the LTV is, what the revenue is, what the cohort is, you can miss it. Like, and this happens to big companies like Uber, for example, had to sue their ad provider because they spent $150 million to the ad agency and $100 million was fraudulent, right? This happens to the biggest companies as well. So this is why it's so important that, be as data driven as you can and really being able to showcase in small, fast iterations that ROI does truly exist for your product or your business.
I actually have a question for you guys. When did you, so you mentioned like having a thesis and really testing that thesis. I feel like, that's kind of high level. Like, what does that actually mean for founders that are actually going through this right now, that are pre-seed, maybe just launched their products? What does that mean to form a thesis? And then how do you actually test it?
Okay, 3 things you want to know. Who is your customer? Why do they buy your product? And where do they buy your product, right? And that's those are 3 questions that you can answer pretty cheaply and pretty efficiently with just like a survey. And even in like the earliest stages of your brand, like it could be a kid's book about, figuring out our customer is a parent, that's maybe between the ages of 25 and 45 years old. They have a decent amount of, expendable income. So maybe they're earning like 70K plus a year or something like that. And they want to buy this product online instead of having to go to the store. In fact, they want it subscribed and they want to get a better deal and they want it to their house. They want podcasts and all this other great stuff too, right? But the only way to really kind of verify that thesis is then to get into, I think through surveys or by buying ads and targeting them, which is kind of like the trap that a lot of VC-funded brands get into, which is like, oh, I've got this wonderful product. Of course, all these millennials are going to want to buy it, and of course, they have all this money, and they're going to purchase it over the one that they can go get at Target, right? And so they waste like hundreds of thousands of dollars on ads trying to figure out if their thesis is actually correct, and if they get it wrong, then they just go move on to like their next thesis, right? So they're kind of just taking all these like shots on goal trying to figure out. So I guess it's like a critique of the VC ecosystem, the way that some brands approach product market fit. But it could be kind of like you can subvert all those problems by just going direct to customers, asking them in those early stages with surveys, or even bouncing stuff off like your friends. I think that helps too, like to verify your thesis.
Yeah, I 1,000% agree with that, Chris. I would also add on to you have to do that over and over time and maintain that curiosity and continue to engage with folks. We have 6 very specific customer personas, and for us, there's a difference between who our user is and who our customer is. And yes, the well-to-do parent is definitely one of those, but also so is the retired grandma, grandpa who is trying to make up for what they didn't have with their kids and they want to make sure their grandkids have it. Also teachers who were just trying to help the kids that they know are handling tough times be equipped to do those with the adults that are in their life. But you have to do that early and often and confirm it and see who comes into the funnel later on as well.
And you know what? That data is so valuable. Like you could sell $1 million worth of books, but like the data on those parents might be a lot more valuable to Disney, for example, if they wanted to acquire you or invest in your business or something like that, than the sales of those books ever could amount to.
Great point. You were going to say something, George?
Yeah, I wanted to add, one thing that, especially in the early stage, it's very difficult to go out and figure out who your ICP is. And one of the things that we recognized for us that worked was rather than going out to find them, let them find you, right? And one very effective way we found to do that is by writing blogs, very heavy technical blogs that'll have 70% bounce rate, right? But very, very high engagement from those who stay, right? Not to get technical, but an example of a blog that we put was accounting for tenant improvement allowances, right? If you Google that and you land on our page that tells you exactly how to do it, that tells us automatically that you need our product, right? Because A, it means that you have a lease, right? You don't have a TIA without a lease. B, you don't have software, because if you did, you wouldn't need to know how to do it. The software would do it automatically. And C, you're using Excel, right? If these 3 things are true, then you are our ideal profile. That's how we got our first 15 customers was requests for demos. Was literally they were reading our blogs, and we'd give them we'd give them about 3/4 of the blog for free, and then at the end it's like, hey, to continue reading, give us your email address, right? And then you have essentially self-selected at that point. You've raised your hand, and then those are the people that we target, right? And then figure out what they all have in common. So find a way to get them to come to you as opposed to you reaching out to them.
Awesome. Thank you, George. As we close out, I want to give everybody an opportunity to say if they have any upcoming events, and then if there's one thing you wish somebody would know about CAC and LTV, what's that one gem that you think they wish to know? So let's go, ladies first. Chandra, please.
Oh man. Events that I have coming up. Obviously, every Tuesday we have pitch practice with some folks on here on the stage. Chris, we're going to get you in there after Women's Month, I promise. But Nick and Stephen has graced the stage before. I'll have some Crowd House shows coming up, which is a live crowdfunding show Shark Tank beats crowdfunding, so that's exciting. And what's the one thing I wish? So it's not like very tactical, but I think I meet a lot of founders that know branding and marketing intrinsically, so they like intuitively understand, but they don't track anything. So the one thing that I would tell the founders that I work with is to start tracking and understanding the numbers and metrics of your business sooner rather than later. Obviously, you'll be grasping at straws at the beginning, but just at least being curious sooner rather than later, and using that as a stepping stone to bringing in more revenue, and not being afraid of the numbers telling you a bad story. That story is what's going to propel your business forward.
Awesome. Thank you. Chris.
Yeah, we have a show on Thursday at 3 p.m. It's in my club, Club CPG, and we're going to be talking with several exited Unilever founders. So people that started their business, like so many people in the audience, and then ended up selling it to a big company like Unilever. And then we'll be talking about kind of like what it's like to make change inside a big company like that, which has got like kind of horror stories, but also like incredible success stories. So I think that'll be really interesting and probably bring a lot of value for people who are building brands. The one thing I wish that people knew about LTV and CAC, especially in the earliest stages, like if you're raising a pre-seed, and even in this, sometimes in the seed stage, like we don't need to see it. Like as investors, like I just don't look at it. And I think it's kind of funny, like sometimes I'll see like a pre-seed deck and it has projections out to like 2023. And I'm like, how do you know this? Like you have like this incredible financial rigor, like perform, but like it's meaningless because you have no real data. You haven't been to market yet, right? So it's okay. And I think that that's like, it's a good thing. Like you should be more focused on like product and product market fit and what you're doing and how you're going to reach your customers with marketing and who's on the team and all that stuff. You don't need to hit us with all LTV and CAC though. I love the ambition.
Facts. Nick.
Awesome. Hi. I guess, I'm taking a break from my wonderful startup school. Shout out to running the amazing pitch events with Chandra and Steven. Those are always great. Check us out tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific. Outside of that, I'm doing a fun experiment in about a week and a half where I'm going to launch an actual startup on Clubhouse and like break down exactly what I'm doing. It's a SaaS startup within our portfolio called Linkup. So I'm just going to share everything from our launch strategy, our venture deck, our growth marketing, and do daily product updates. So if interested, feel free to follow along. I'll be sharing a little bit more details out next week. Outside of that, really, I think the biggest key takeaway I would tell people is try to embrace like what I call the scientific method of business building, where you double down, refine, or kill at fast rates. When you're at this early stage, there's all these unknowns, but if you can create really strong parameters on how to put a thesis out, execute and evaluate that thesis, and then analyze those results to understand, is it worth doubling down, refining, or killing, is a really, really important skill. Those fast rates, those fast iterations, it could be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, choose the cadence that suits you, but build it within those parameters to understand, is this thing working for you? And if you could really build that out with those strong parameters, you'll never be caught off guard. And again, that's a hard thing to implement, especially when so many things are unknown, but that's when you need these kind of parameters in such unknown territory. So really for that, it's like observe, build a vision, form an initial hypothesis, then you refine that hypothesis with testable predictions, experiment, and then analyze, and just go through that loop consistently. Whatever it may be, you'll really be well suited on being able to experiment and try new things and get real results and hopefully double down when things work.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. George.
Thank you so much. Once again, this was fun. I don't really have any events or anything. I'm not. I don't.
You're running a company. We know. You're running a big company. One piece of advice that you got, George.
Yeah, so I think that the advice that I would give is measure everything. It kind of dovetails on what Chandra and Nick said. Measure everything, right? Because and primarily because you can't improve that which you don't measure. Right. If you don't measure it, you just can't improve it. And so don't focus primarily on just, LTV and CAC, but, try to focus on, okay, what is it? What's that metric? I think Nick mentioned this earlier when he talked about cohorts. What's that metric that tells you that this customer is going to stick or this customer is going to convert to a paying customer, right? What is it? Is it adding a lease? Is it logging in once a month? Measure all these things, because from there, you'll be able to get information, which will help you, make better decisions.
Awesome. Thank you. I will say thank you again for joining us here in the Black Founders Club. I look forward to our upcoming event on Friday with Harold Hughes. Always amazing, always gems for that. Join us early. That one's at 8 a.m. Pacific time every Friday. The one piece of advice that I would have is cash is king. Like, I'm a recovering banker. You've got to understand how cash moves through your business, and LTV and CAC are part of understanding that. But at the end of the day, like, you don't pay your employees with profit, you don't pay them with revenue, you pay them with cash. And so, understand how cash is moving through your business at all times. And then it's March 1st. International Women's Day is coming up, and we're celebrating women all month. Find a great woman-owned business to support. Send them reviews online, buy their product, give them a shout out, do whatever you can to support them. So thank you, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Have a good one. Thank you to our moderators for joining us as
Thanks,
well.
everybody.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks everyone.
guys.
This was great.
Bye.
Thank you.